Protests have broken out around the world, with angry protesters coming out in force. But why are people protesting? And what do all of the protests have in common? This is America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Subscribe to this channel and turn the notification bell on so you can be the first to watch our new episodes every week. So, how many of you have ever been part of a protest? I remember my first hunger strike. No, Mom, I will not eat my broccoli. It's against my principles. The idea of protesting is baked into the very fiber of being human. Protests can make people with power take notice. They can create change in a system where the average person can't participate in the political process. Protesting was the calling card of luminaries like Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and me when I didn't want to finish my dinner. Down with tyranny. This past month, there's been huge protests in different parts of the world. What are they all about, and what might they have in common? Today, we'll look at 5 of them. First, Hong Kong. Hong Kong is here in southern China, a tiny city with a huge population. Hong Kong is one of the most volatile political situations since the 1991 Chappell family Thanksgiving. Mom, you spent 5 hours making a turkey, and you won't even make me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? This is what happens when you don't have the right to vote. Anyway, the protests in Hong Kong have been going on for 5 months. People are upset at the Chinese Communist Party. The party controls China's government, which in turn controls Hong Kong's government, which in turn has tried to take away a lot of the freedoms they had promised Hong Kongers back in 1997. That's the year the UK handed Hong Kong over to Chinese rule. As much as a quarter of the city has come out to protest. Most of the protests have been peaceful. Hong Kong police have not been peaceful. On Monday this week, police shot an unarmed protester with a revolver. And now the protests have escalated. Long story short, Hong Kongers are protesting against China's authoritarian rule. They're asking to keep their freedoms that are being taken away. And the United States government seems to agree. The House of Representatives recently passed 2 bills supporting Hong Kong. And U.S. officials from both parties have been outspoken on Hong Kong. The Chinese authorities don't like that so much. For more on Hong Kong, you can check out our continuing coverage on China Uncensored. Next, Chile. Chile is a long, narrow country that spans much of the length of South America's western coast. Yes, it's pronounced Chile and not Chile, which coincidentally is also something young Chris Chappell refused to eat for dinner. Seriously, how hard is it to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich? In 1973, Chile was taken over by General Augusto Pinochet, a dictator responsible for thousands of deaths over the course of his 17-year rule. Pinochet is dead, but the constitution his government adopted is still very much alive. Many Chileans say the laws in effect since Pinochet's era are partly responsible for Chile's current problems, including major income inequality and insufficient public services. Then in October, the government raised metro fares. That was the straw that broke the llama's back. Riots erupted. Over the past month or so, at least 23 people have died in protests and more than 1,600 have been wounded. Authorities have detained thousands. Weeks of protests included a march on October 25th that more than 1 million people joined. Eventually, the protesters got results. Chilean President Sebastián Piñera fired 8 government ministers. He put in a younger and more centrist cabinet that he hopes will be appealing to the protesters. President Piñera has also given in to other demands like getting rid of the metro fare hike and proposing wage and pension reforms. For many protesters, though, the proposals are not enough, and demonstrations will continue possibly until President Piñera steps down. As protests and strikes continue, Piñera has now said that he will start the process to draft a new constitution. And the protests have also affected the U.S. Chile had to cancel this month's APEC meeting, an important event where world leaders were going to gather, and where Trump was hoping to meet with China's leader to sign a partial trade deal. Then there is the country of Iraq. Iraq is in the Middle East somewhere. Many citizens have been playing Survivor in Iraq since the 1970s, and the US has often been in the picture, although US troops officially left 8 years ago. Iraq set up a new government after the fall of Saddam Hussein, but it's been far from perfect. Protests in Iraq have picked up starting early October this year. Protesters have rallied against the ruling elite, who they see as corrupt and incompetent. They blame them for widespread unemployment and the lack of adequate public services. Hear those gunshots? Iraqi security forces have killed around 300 protesters since the protests began last month. Protesters called for Iraq's prime minister to step down. He said he would, but only if a replacement can be found. Yes, as Aristotle once put it, nature abhors a vacuum. Much like my cat. But even the prime minister's pending resignation has failed to satisfy protesters. Many of them want a complete overhaul of the government, and until more demands are met, the protests continue, and unfortunately, so do the bullets. Yet if only some foreign power could just come in and oust the leadership, that would solve all of Iraq's problems. Then there is the country of Bolivia. Bolivia is one of those things in life that my cat doesn't abhor. Yes, he's been many times, thank you very much. Bolivia's presidential election this October saw the re-election of President Evo Morales. Morales was first elected president 14 years ago. He ran on a left-leaning platform that included defending the indigenous people, the environment, and the poor, which he did not do. Lately, Morales has been seen as a champion of moneyed interests, cronyism, and the ruling class. He also changed the Constitution so he could keep running for president. Generally, a bad sign. Also, October's election was probably rigged. Hundreds of thousands of people have protested across the country, with groups from the left and right coming together against Morales. For weeks, police had responded with repression. But by the end of last week, police had a change of heart, and many of them actually joined the protesters. The military also refused to crack down on the protests, and when the dictator, president, loses support of the police and the military, he's in deep trouble. But not if he resigns first and flees to Mexico. Bolivia now has an interim president as they prepare for new elections. Pro-Morales people have accused the U.S. of interfering in Bolivia's internal affairs. But honestly, the CIA is not what it once was, guys. You probably don't even know where Bolivia is. If you're interested in hearing more about how the protesters in Bolivia won, check out our latest podcast on China Unscripted, where we talk to a Bolivian activist about the protests and Bolivia's ties to China. This is Spain, and this region of Spain is known as Catalonia, which also happens to be the name of my cat. And Catalonia wants to be left alone. The region, not my cat. Okay, also my cat. For centuries, Catalonia has had its own language and culture, and today, many Catalans see their region as contributing more than their fair share to support Spain's sluggish economy. That issue and many others have divided Catalans and the rest of Spain for a long, long time. In 2017, there was a movement to vote for Catalan independence through a referendum. The Spanish government said, no, you can't just vote for independence, that's not allowed. But Catalonia held the vote anyway. Then authorities arrested a bunch of the separatist leaders, or patriot leaders, depending on whose side you're on. That was 2 years ago. But last month, they sentenced 9 of those leaders to long prison terms for sedition. That sparked a new wave of protests. Around 350,000 pro-independence demonstrators marched on Barcelona, waving Catalan flags. But unlike the previous protests I've mentioned, the protests in Catalonia have a very, very large counterpart. Tens of thousands of pro-unity protesters also marched in Barcelona, waving Spanish flags. They argue Catalonia has historically been part of Spain, it's treated well, and has as much liberty and freedom as the rest of Western Europe, and that Catalan separatists are ostracizing Spaniards living in the region. They also say Catalonia's independence movement is driven by socialist and communist groups. There may be something to that. This article in a popular socialist magazine frames the Catalan independence movement as class struggle against state repression from the Spanish regime. And when you see this flag with the red star, that's the Catalonia socialist flag. But the majority of protesters use this flag, which is not socialist. So, it's complicated, like everything we talk about on this show. So if you're like me, you're wondering what all these protests may have in common. Well, they don't all have the same goal, but they're all largely peaceful. And they're using the media to get their message out. And mostly, they're leaderless. That means that they're difficult for governments to control, but also harder for governments to negotiate with. They also all affect the interests of the United States to some degree, which really is the important part, right? So what do you think of the protests rocking the globe? Leave your comments below. And remember, America Uncovered is supported mainly by viewers. So visit patreon.com/AmericaUncovered. Contribute $1 or more per episode. We rely on your support to help us keep making great episodes. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.